253,602 votes. That's where Caitlin Clark sits right now. Fifth place in a race she dominated by over 515,000 votes, just one year ago. Aya Wilson leads. Paige Bueckers is second. Even her teammate Aaliyah Boston sits ahead of her. For a player who reshaped this league's spotlight, falling this far isn't just a number, it's a question mark over everything. Fans thought they knew this shooting variance. Voter fatigue, something bigger beneath the surface? Let's discuss these things in this video and break down exactly what's behind this drop and what it means before voting closes, the numbers nobody expected. There is a difference between a surprise and a shock. And what happened when the WNBA released its first All-Star fan vote returns this week landed firmly in the second category. At the top of the leaderboard sat Aya Wilson, with 308,249 votes, a number that on its own made complete sense. Wilson has been historically dominant this season, and her fans showed up right behind her in a result that turned heads across the basketball world. Was Paige Bueckers of the Dallas Wings posting.
Joining her teammates, making her second All-Star appearance, the 2023 Rookie of the Year from the Indiana Fever, Aaliyah Boston.
298,027 votes. Then came a name that stunned even Indiana Fever loyalists, Aaliyah Boston, Clark's own teammate. Claiming third place with 282,186 votes, Breanna Stewart followed in fourth with 255,879, and then finally, in fifth, the player who has arguably done more for this league's visibility than anyone in a generation, with 253,602 votes. Why does this number sting so much more than it would for anyone else? Because everyone remembers what happened just 1 year earlier in the first return of the 2025 All-Star vote. Clark didn't just win. She dominated, pulling in more than 515,000 votes before any other player had built real momentum. She was not simply popular. She was the gravitational center of the entire conversation. Fans organized around her candidacy. The way fans organize around championship runs. Networks built segments around her vote totals. And now, 12 months later, she sits behind 4 other players, including her own teammate, in a ranking system that fans.
A'ja Wilson has been named the 2022 WNBA MVP, her second MVP after she won.
Built with their own thumbs, did a single early return enough to declare a crisis? Of course not. And it's worth saying clearly that voting remains open through the end of June, with plenty of time for movement. But numbers like this don't exist. A drop of this magnitude from clear-cut leader to fifth place does not happen by accident. Something shifted. The only question is what, and whether it reflects basketball fatigue or something else entirely, playing out beneath the surface of a fan base that once seemed unshakable. What makes this moment even more layered is the timing. This isn't a quiet stretch of the season where attention naturally drifts. This is peak WNBA season, with playoff positioning tightening and storylines multiplying by the week. For Clark's name to fall this far during a season where she remains one of the most talked about athletes in American sports, all of sports, raises a question that deserves more than a passing glance. Does popularity inevitably plateau? Or is this drop a signal of something happening in real time, something that the raw vote totals are only beginning to?
Voting for All-Star from the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark.
Reveal. Consider too how this result lands against the backdrop of an All-Star game that already carries extra significance this year. The 2026 event is scheduled for July 25th. A passionate fan base in a media market that pays close attention to every storyline the league produces. A vote shakeup like this happening in the lead up to a marquee event in a marquee city guarantees that the conversation will not fade quietly. If anything, the location amplifies the stakes, turning what might otherwise be a quiet statistical curiosity into a storyline that will follow Clark and the rest of the league all the way into the All-Star weekend itself. There is also a generational layer worth acknowledging. Clark entered the league carrying an almost unprecedented weight of expectation, the kind usually reserved for once-in-a-decade prospects in much older, more established in Chicago, a city stepping into the hosting role for just the second time in the event's history. Chicago is not a neutral market. IT is one of the league's most basketball-literate cities. Not just women's basketball.
Caitlin Clark, by far, is the best offensive player we have seen in decades, the best get-ahead passer.
In a vacuum, they tell a story, even an incomplete one, and the story being told right now is uncomfortable for anyone published leagues. She met that weight, and in many ways exceeded it, becoming the face of a ratings surge that reshaped how networks and sponsors approached women's basketball almost overnight. A fan base built that quickly, around that much pressure, tends to respond strongly to anything that looks like a threat. To her standing, that is precisely why this vote total, even as a single early data point, has generated this much attention. Because it touches a nerve that has been sensitive since the very beginning of her professional career. The mystery behind Caitlin Clark's vote slide. Here is where the numbers get genuinely difficult to reconcile. On the court, Clark has not regressed, she has, in many ways, grown. She's averaging 20.4 points per game, 8.3 assists, and 4.6 rebounds this season.
Entire sports world was talking about a young woman in Iowa, raised in Des Moines and found her fame in Iowa City, Caitlin Clark,
who has watched Clark's rise over the past 2 years. Numbers that place her among the most productive guards in the entire league. Her assist average alone leads most of her peers, a reflection of a player who has matured into more than a scorer. She's become a true offensive engine for the Indiana Fever. So, if the on-court performance hasn't collapsed, why would the fan vote suggest otherwise? Part of the answer lives in small inefficiencies fans notice, even when the overall numbers stay strong. Clark is shooting 40.2% from the field this season and 32.4% from beyond the arc, both respectable marks, but a step below the blistering efficiency that initially made her a viral phenomenon for a player whose entire introduction to basketball was built on logo three-pointers and highlight reel range. Even a modest dip in shooting percentage becomes a talking point. It's not that she's become a worse player. It's that the specific qualities that made her impossible to ignore in her rookie season have softened.
Chicago Sky faced off against the Indiana Fever right here in Chicago today.
Just enough to give critics something to point toward. There's also the matter of team record. The Indiana Fever opened this season inconsistently, splitting results across their first 10 games before stabilizing into the form that has them firmly in playoff position today. Early season stumbles don't erase a player's value, but they do shape perception. And perception, more than production, often drives a fan vote. When a Stars team is winning convincingly, when a team is fighting for stability, even a star performance can get lost in the noise of a shaky record. There's a second layer worth noting here. The Fever currently sit third in the Eastern